last week, or the last time, we kind of finished up the Mosaic covenant when it went from vassal covenant, from kinship covenant to vassal covenant. And one thing I didn't cover last week is that though we saw things happen in the Old Testament and come to pass and get fulfilled, like for example, the part of the Mosaic covenant was that if you disobey God, then you're going to be taken to a foreign land, and everybody understood that to be Babylon. And there were other things in it, but Jesus also said that in Luke 24 that I came to fulfill everything that was written about me in Moses, the Psalms, and the prophets. So he was also saying that in a greater context, like there was an immediate context for the fulfillment of the things that happened in the Old Testament, but also there was like a larger spiritual context where that Jesus came to fulfill all of those things as well. So them being called off to Babylon and taken as exiles into Babylon got fulfilled again when the whole Mosaic covenant was completed. And because in the Mosaic covenant it said that this city would be destroyed, and everybody understood that as Babylon. But then when Jesus came, the city was once again completely destroyed, and it happens that it was destroyed on exactly the same day, 400 and something years apart from each other. It's the 9th of Av, and the Jews celebrate that as their greatest day of mourning because the temple was destroyed from the invading Babylonians. Was it the Babylonians who invaded Jerusalem and took, yes, the invading Babylonians and also the invading Romans, and the temple was destroyed on the same day. Wow. In the Jewish calendar too, which is a kind of a rotating calendar, so it makes it even more interesting. So I might get more into that later. So the two covenants that we're going to talk about today, we talked a little bit before about the Abrahamic covenant. We talked about the covenant that God made with Abraham, but we didn't really talk about its fulfillment. And we're also going to be talking about the Davidic covenant. So the Davidic covenant is found in 2 Samuel 7, where David becomes king, and he's walking around and he's looking at his palace and he's like, this is amazing. And then he's like, hey, God, you just have this tent and you don't have a grand house like I do. I want to be your friend. I want to make a house for you. And 2
Samuel 10, you said?
2 Samuel 7.
Okay.
I can remember it because the S's. So 2 Samuel 7. So he says that he wants to build a house for God. And Nathan the prophet says, do that's all in your heart. And then later that night, Nathan has a dream, and God says that David is not going to be the one to build a house for him because he has too much blood on his hands. But in the way that God is, because he's so good and so grand, God says to David in return, that's so great that you wanted me to build a house, but instead I'm going to build you a house, meaning dynasty. And I'm going to give you this house, and your descendants are going to sit on the throne forever. It will be an eternal kingdom, and it's going to last forever. And David's response is like, you're the most incredible God that there is, who's like you, because other gods would take and receive sacrifices, but just this one act of kindness that David wanted to do towards God, God in some ways rejected it from David, saying, yes, you'll build me a house, your son will build me a house, that's okay. But God came back with, you wanted to show me love, I'm going to show you amazing amounts of love. And it's kind of the same thing echoed in Solomon's life, where God says to Solomon, what do you want? And Solomon just says, I want wisdom to rule your people. And God's just like so amazed, like, wow, you could have asked for anything. You could have asked for wealth or riches or conquering, and you didn't ask for that. So because you asked for this smaller thing in comparison, or maybe this great big thing, but he wasn't after the riches of man. He was after God's wisdom to rule wisely. So God says, because you asked for wisdom, I'm going to give you all of the things that you didn't ask for. So it's kind of an echo in that, in like the goodness of God and the things that God does. The Song of Songs talks about like one glance of your eye and you're captivated. And that's like once we just glance his way just one time, he's completely enthralled with us and captivated and just loves us so much. So Nathan the prophet comes back to David after that night when he had told David, go ahead and do that's all in your heart. And we can go to 2 Samuel and see what it says. It starts in the 2 Samuel chapter 7. God's like saying, like, I never commanded anybody to build me a house. I've been with the Israelites to this day, and I never said at one time. But now, therefore, this is verse 8, go and say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following my sheep, that you should rule over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you have gone, and cut off all your enemies before you. And I will, and here's the promise, I will make you a great name, like the names of the great men who are on the earth. I will also appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, that they may live in their own place and not be disturbed again, nor will the wicked afflict them any more as formerly. Even from that day I commanded the judges to be over my people. I will give you rest from all your enemies. The Lord also declares to you that the Lord will make a house for you. And it's a play on words there. That's where he's saying, I'm going to make you a dynasty. Mm-hmm. For when your days are complete and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendants after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of the Son of Men. But my loving kindness shall not depart from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever, and your throne shall be established forever. In accordance with all these words and this vision, so Nathan spoke to David. So Nathan is giving David a twofold prophecy. One that's fulfilled in the immediate future of, I'm going to give you a son, and he's going to be the one to build a house for me, and I'll be with him. And it was, in fact, Solomon who built the house of God, which is what the Israelites called the temple. They always called it the house. So when he says, verse 13, he shall build a house for my name, he is talking about Solomon, but he's also talking about Jesus. And there's a mixture of those in there. And we know that because it says, when he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of sons of men. Jesus never did any wrong. And Hebrews says that though he did no wrong, he did not open up his mouth, and like a lamb before the shearers was silent. So we know in that particular instance, within that context, Nathan, the prophet, was talking both spiritual fulfillment and physical fulfillment in the land of Israel, that Solomon would build that house, but Jesus is also the house that God is building through him. Mm-hmm. And then David responds, and it's 7:18, and his response is, he basically what I was talking about before is this goodness of the God. In verse 22, he says, "For this reason thou art great, O Lord God, for there is none like thee. There's none God besides thee, according to all that we have heard with our ears." And one nation on the earth is like the people Israel, who God went forth to redeem for himself a people and to make a name for himself and to do great things for thee and awesome things in thy land before thy people. It's in verse 19. Yet this was insignificant in the eyes of God, for thou hast spoken also of the house of the servant concerning the distant future. So David was recognizing that at some distant future there was a king coming as well. So David in somehow understood that the prophecy was for the distant future, but also for the history of man. So there's things in here. Let's see. The 4 major promises that God gives David in this, the covenant is, I will make your name great. I will be his father and he will be my son. I will build you a house, and your house, kingdom, and throne shall be forever. Where is it? I will be a father to him and he will be my son. It's verse 14. That is a reference to Jesus when all the time through the 4 Gospels, when people are calling Jesus the Son of David, they're also calling him this person. They're recognizing that Jesus is, at least they're saying with their declaration of Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. They're saying like, I recognize you to be the person of these promises. So when the Pharisees and the scribes and stuff were worried that everybody was going over to him or that he was gaining prophet or adherents, and they were very frustrated, and the question kept coming up, was he Messiah? And people were calling him Son of David. This is the very thing that they were talking about. Like, this is the guy, this is the one that was promised. He's the Son of David, and he's coming, and he's going to establish the throne of Israel, and he's going to sit on the throne forever. So that's part of that whole thing that was happening in Israel at the time, is that Jesus was a man. He was of the line of David, and he knew that, but then he also wasn't acting like this king who was rising up and wanting to destroy the enemies of Israel, and he wasn't trying to be this military leader that they were expecting, because David was the greatest king in all of Israel, and he's remembered that is the glory days. David and Solomon during that time frame, that 80 years, that 100-year time frame, was the greatest time that Israel ever saw, and they speak of it. So they were looking forward to that time, because Solomon, David was a man of war. When God said, there's too much blood on your hands, you won't be able to build the house. Solomon was a man of peace, and it talks about Solomon and all the wealth that he had, and the people of Israel were wealthy also. It says that silver was as dust in the streets. Like, the whole entire country prospered under King Solomon, and they were not at war during his reign either.